Hi, y'all. It's Brigitte Cutshall with Real Things Living. Today, my guest is Sara Hartley. She's the healthcare marketing executive, certified in neurodiversity and ADHD as a coach, and the author of Purposefully Me. It's a 13-book children's series. Can you say hi, Sara?
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Bridget.
I enjoy talking to people like you. We have a lot more in common than I realized. Before I hit record, we learned that we're both mom boys. Is that mom boys? And they are a challenge, but I appreciate that challenge. You have to look at that. Right. Still here because we learned from that too.
100%.
So I guess what prompted me, I was very interested in your story is that you had to deal with Lyme disease, and then you learned later that right, your son had ADHD and all this crazy stuff was going on. How did your first step to try to manage this?
That's a great question. I think, there's a lot of times where we will almost ignore things that are happening with our own health. And then when something happens to our child, we will immediately dive into, what is it? How do I solve the problem? How do I fix this? And so my son was actually diagnosed with ADHD prior to me being diagnosed with Lyme disease, but it was shortly thereafter. It was all very within a short time frame that all of this happened. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 25, and at that time, they just give you medication and they really say, be on your way. And there's no additional follow up or, hey, maybe you should see someone about learning more about strategies or just understanding how your brain works. And so while I had had it for many years prior to my son's diagnosis, I really didn't truly understand it until I had him. And you mentioned earlier learning from our children. And I think that is the biggest thing for me that has transpired is what can I learn more about him? And I've learned more about myself through his eyes and just the experiences that he's had. And so because of that, I've really had to try to figure out my own mental health journey, combining that with the Lyme disease element as well, and really practice mindfulness. I've developed a technique that's more of a grounding technique because I've tried a million things. And in the moment, there weren't many things that work for me. So I really have latched on to this aligned parenting method that I've developed. And those are the kind of things that help me to maintain calm while really navigating his diagnosis.
Yeah, and it's tough because you want to take care of your sons. That's what your mom's calling, as a mom, and then you need to also take care of yourself because you have to be there for them, right? It's a tough thing that you're dealing with. So what are the symptoms of ADHD? I'm sure it's different for everybody, maybe.
Yeah, it is. And I think initially when symptoms that we started to see from him presented different than myself as well. There's a lot of things where once I was diagnosed, I could look back and say, oh, in hindsight, that seemed like an impulsivity or that could have maybe been something that a teacher or my parents maybe should have recognized at that time. But for me and for girls versus boys, it presents very differently. And then it can just depend on the person where you might have girls that present as a typical boy would or vice versa. And so the first thing that I noticed about my son, there were a couple of different things, and it's all in the realm of neurodiversity, but he was surpassing milestones from the very beginning, whether it was just rolling over, sitting up, walking at 9 months old, speaking full sentences by 2. I thought, wow, this is, interesting. He seems to be an overachiever, but is there more to this? And then around 18 months old or so, we started noticing his aggressive behavior. So he would become really aggressive, which was interesting because he was such a good communicator and he did know how to use his words in that sense because he did understand what was happening. The frustrations were coming from other peers that he had at 3 years old, 2 and 3 years old, that weren't maybe on that same cognitive level. And so he might get very frustrated with another child or the full scope of a preschool classroom. So it's really loud. There's a lot of noises. Babies are crying. They're drumming things. And so his sensory sensitivities were the first thing that we really noticed beyond the aggressiveness of he was always covering his ears. He did not like loud noises unless he was the one making the sound. If he was into it, I remember when he was really young, we would put on Moana and we would sing all those songs from Moana and he would play the drums and, we would would all sing together, and he loved that because he was the one that was creating the sound. But if he walked into a place where there was, a birthday party and it was really loud, or a classroom in the morning, he wanted to be the first kid there because he needed to settle in and not be overwhelmed by the noise. He didn't like tags in his clothes. He'd get very itchy, or just very hot immediately. It seemed like he was never comfortable from a temperature standpoint, and he didn't want anything on his hands. He very much avoided any kind of Play-Doh or slime, or anything that most kids really love to play with from a tactile standpoint. So the sensory piece was really something early on. And I have a friend who is an OT in the school system, and she said, he might be gifted. And I didn't really quite understand what that meant at that time. My mind immediately went to autistic. And so I dove in, learned more about it, and found out that when you have that higher IQ, it's really just about giftedness is on the essentially how high is your IQ? Are you, 99th percentile, 99.9th percentile, whatever that might be. And whether or not it's maybe paired with another neurodiversity like ADHD, autism, dyslexia, sensory processing disorder. And so I started to uncover this element of what it means to be twice exceptional. And we went down the path of testing, had him tested for everything. He is highly gifted, has sensory processing disorder, and was diagnosed with ADHD as well. So we also tested for autism and ODD, a defiant disorder, and he did not have either of those at that time. So it helped to uncover and understand a bit more about what was going on and what was happening, and really caught those sensory elements were causing that aggressive behavior.
Right. I never really heard about all this stuff until some of my sons, when they were in high school, their friends were getting diagnosed with that. I've heard ADD and ADHD. So what's the difference? Is the H mean hyper?
It does. Yes, it means hyperactivity, though now I believe they're almost even doing away with the ADD part. I thought, oh, well, I must be inattentive, because that's typically what characteristics of ADHD people would be, that they're hyperactive, or they're inattentive, or they're very impulsive. So maybe they have difficulty paying attention. Thought I must have been, I was, never got in trouble in school, a rule follower to a T. There was no, I did great, had great grades. There was no reason for my parents or teachers to think I may have had ADHD. So I thought all these years, well, I must be inattentive, maybe, and not hyperactive, because I can watch my son. He is bouncing off the walls. I mean, bouncing everywhere. He is constantly in motion. And that didn't really seem like me as much, but my brain didn't really have the same response. And so I recently took a quiz that actually said that I am hyperactive. It's that my body is not, but my brain is. So I am more of that driven by a motor, where my brain will not shut off. So I definitely have trouble sleeping, always have. I remember even as a child having difficulty sleeping, but that's really the core thing of it. Can look very different for multiple people, gender, even age. A lot of women are experiencing symptoms of ADHD now through perimenopause and into menopause. That is, maybe it was present all along, but just wasn't as exacerbated as it becomes once you hit that perimenopause stage.
When they were prescribing the medicine that you said, does it help you focus better? Because I think that is what one of my son's friends was doing. It helped her focus. His friend was it helped her focus rather than just running around doing stuff.
Yes, and I think there's an interesting piece that I've learned more recently of it's not necessarily the inability to focus, it's the inability for your brain to decipher what to focus on. So I can give the example of, if a child were to walk into a classroom, the teacher maybe wrote on the board the instructions for the day. A neurotypical child walks in, unpacks their stuff, does what they're supposed to do, sits down. The kid with ADHD walks in, they can see all the colors of maybe the shirt that one kid's wearing. They hear the pencil tapping. They, are smelling different smells from lunches or breakfast from the morning. There's just so much sensory input that's happening that their brain can't decide, where do I start? Which is one reason why my son likes to get to school early. And even now, my little one is riding the bus every morning, and he's so cute going to kindergarten. But my fourth grader is like, nope, I want to get to school early. I want to have that 15 minutes before the bell rings. I need to get settled in before the volume gets loud and everybody else gets in there. So that's more of his preference. But when you do have ADHD, you can focus. You can really hyper focus almost to a fault, where you're so focused on a specific thing, and it's usually something that you like to do. So I think what the medication does is it allows for you to drown out some of that other noise and create that focus. But you kind of have to be ready to do it. Where if I were to take a medication on a Saturday, I might not stop cleaning. My focus might be that I'm cleaning this house and I'm going to be in every room, versus, working on a presentation. So it depends on the scenario where you might focus a little bit too much and not be able to stop.
It sounds like your son is actually pretty smart because he knows how to help calm himself down a little bit by getting there early. That's kind of how I see it. He's listening to himself, maybe. I mean, that's just my takeaway.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
he does sound very smart. I think that is good, and we need to respect that for those kids. And I'm sure just kids in general, that's why they're at that age, they're, I should say, naturally active. But is he physically active too? Like when he's, yeah, I'm assuming, yeah.
Oh, yes, he is. I mean, thankfully, he has the genes on my family side, and he's very tall. So while he did go to kindergarten early because he had missed the cutoff. So he started kindergarten at 4, and he is the youngest in his class. He is by far the tallest and loves basketball. His aspiration is to be a professional basketball player. So, hopefully that's something that will stick. He loves soccer and flag football. He's really just started that. Swimming, which is a really great one for kids, neurodiverse kids. Swimming is huge. It creates proprioceptive input when you're swimming, and it's like deep pressure on the body that helps to regulate their nervous system. So he's always active, but when there is that idle time, yes, was it Tuesday earlier this week? He does not have an after school activity. He goes to aftercare, but we didn't have anything that evening for sports. And it was him and his brother were just at each other's throats. They were constantly fighting. And if he has that idle time, it really gets him into trouble. He needs to be doing something physically with his body, especially after sitting in school all day long.
That's what I was thinking. Just I've noticed that with other kids who have been diagnosed with ADHD. So they're better. I think also boys in general need that energy to burn off anyway, even if you have ADHD or not. They just naturally have that, I think. And I think it's really great what you're doing. You're listening to yourself and your son. And then I'm going to go back to your Lyme disease thing. This was how many years ago did this happen?
I was diagnosed in September of 2021. I've always had very random and strange health issues over the years. And so looking back, I was probably around 7 or 8 years old. I recall being bit by 2 different ticks. So not sure, exact, somewhere within that age time frame. I was a Girl Scout. We were in the woods a lot in Georgia. It is hot and sticky and, a lot of poison ivy and snakes and all the things, but ran around instead. Even as a child, that was probably around the age that I can really look back to starting to recognize some of my ADHD symptoms. And the real correlation here is I have Lyme disease, and 4 co-infections, but I also have neuro Lyme. And so part of that comes a lot of brain fog, some short-term memory loss. Those are also executive functioning skills that are lacking in someone who has ADHD. So this kind of compounded effect where it can go dormant with Lyme disease. There's never really a cure. But I think that after having both children, especially the second child, that's when I really felt the symptoms far more than I ever had before. And so it's still very much a work in progress. But I think it's like you mentioned before, you have to almost put on your oxygen mask before you help your child or your neighbor. And as that's the same way, whether you have a chronic illness or you are neurodiverse or you're just a neurotypical parent and dealing with the way things are currently and all the busy schedules, there has to be something that's going to help to ground you and allow for you to create your own sense of calm and be healthy for yourself to be able to show up for your children.
That's true. I like that. And you're putting on your oxygen mask. And so I guess I also want to ask them what prompted you to become neurodiversity and ADHD coach? Just because of your experience with your sons, I'm assuming.
It is, and really, the more as I started writing these books, it was really in the thick of all of this around 2021. my child's diagnosis, Lyme disease diagnosis, really had that aha moment, in the shower. Shower thoughts are sometimes the best ones, where we become the most creative. And when that happened, I just had this moment, and for me, writing began that really cathartic experience. And so together, those things have really helped me to form what my mission is, by night, because I have my career by day. But, my ultimate goal of all of it is to be able to allow for children to feel a little bit less alone in their brains, whether that could be a chronic illness or it could just be an element of neurodiversity. When I look back, I just think about the times in my life where I wish I had maybe someone that I felt confident enough to talk to, or just relate to. And now it's interesting, the friendships that I have now seem to be all people that have ADHD, or most of them late diagnoses, they didn't recognize it. And then, of course, all of our children seem to have it as well. So it's definitely been a learning experience, and all of that. Definitely, it came to a low point for me to be able to create and start to transform the things that I knew. And so having that additional background with the coaching piece just helped me learn a little bit more and how to start allowing for some of those strategies with the current output that I'm putting on social media and the books that I have. It helped tie in some of the calming strategies into the books that I've written and in my platform.
I like the idea that you took all this info, whatever, and created books, children's books, especially because you're trying to help them. And I think it's a good idea to have them hold a book, or it could be a digital version rather than screen all. I just think it's probably better for them to help them to look at that in front of their hands. And you said it's a 13-book series. That's impressive. I mean, that's a lot of my background is in publishing. What is the trim size? I'm just curious.
They're 32-page children's illustrated books. So
Like 8 by
yeah, 8.5 by 11, I believe. And the first one, we're almost finalized. I was sent the final layout last night. And so we're hoping for that to launch early November. And then we'll do one a month after that. But it's the idea behind it, as well as I've always been one to push the envelope on topics that are discussed. And so I feel like there's such a gap that's missing with children's books around difficult topics. So some of the topics are ADHD, autism. Even one of my very good friends recently had a daughter who has Down syndrome. So there's a Down syndrome book. There's one around death, divorce, bullying. It covers a whole gamut of the spectrum of where some of those difficult challenges are that children have. And I want for not only the children to feel a little less alone and more relatable to these characters, but for the parent or teacher reading this book to them to say, wow, I see myself in that book, and it helps them to also feel that connection where they feel a little bit less alone as well.
That is so true. They'll feel valued, right? I think a lot of those kids who have issues like you had mentioned, they don't feel valued, and they feel they can get bullied too. I think, and the bullies probably need to read it too, maybe, right?
Absolutely. Oh, and that's the interesting tie of actually one of the first stories that'll be released is Purposefully Brave. And that one is centered around bullying. And it talks about the bully even, or the main character even stepping in at one time and did some of the bullying, thinking that was the right thing to do because all of their friends were, peer pressuring them into it, but then said, wait, that doesn't feel right to me. So, a lot of it's kind of uncovering some of that internal conflict or conflict with others that happens, and how do you come out of that to understand, what was that situation telling you, and what was the true purpose of what you were dealing with. So I'm excited for those to release. Another one is around school drills, and I think that, I don't know if you've heard, but there was a high school shooting yesterday in Evergreen, Colorado.
I did read that. Yes.
And that for me is what when I initially started all of this and had, at that point, maybe written 7 books, I always see that as what was going through the shooter's mind. What kind of support didn't they have? how alone did they feel? Because maybe they did have some type of neurodiversity. Maybe they were severely depressed. Maybe they were being bullied. People typically don't do that sort of act without something else behind it. So I always become really curious and just trying to understand what could we have done to stop that. What were some warning signs ahead of time? And that's where I think my ultimate goal is, if I can have one child say, wow, this made me feel a little bit less alone, then I feel like I've done my job there. And my heart is just, broken, and thoughts and prayers go out to all of those that are in Evergreen, Colorado.
Yeah, it's definitely, I've got chills as you're talking because it's just it seems to be happening more. We had a last year in the Metro Atlanta area, a high school shooting, a bunch of kids died. So I don't remember the number of children, but it happened like a year ago last week because school started. It's just, I don't know, remember why the kid did it. I don't know. I think his father is in jail because his father bought him the gun,
Oh, wow.
thinking he needed it. You know what I'm saying? I think the young man, I think he did commit suicide afterwards, but it's just still sad what kids are going through these days. And I'm glad, in my heart too, as a mom, and you just want to help the younger generation, give them some support and talk about this because this was never talked about when I was younger, never. And I was born in the mid 60s and grew up in the 70s. So mental health was not talked about and ever. And I don't know why, uh, but it's now we're normalizing people not being normal, right? Which is good. We're not all the same. We're all different. And you mentioned bullying. I was bullied, believe it or not, when I was young because my mother is from France and she couldn't speak proper English. You know what I'm saying?
Oh.
And it's just like that. And I was part of the desegregation. So they put me into the black schools and they were actually really nice to me. They were nicer to me over there. Isn't that funny? And I think that's probably what broadened my view of the world. Became more empathetic, right? Everybody's different, but we should be kind to each other. And you did mention about unnecessarily bullying. I'm pretty sure I did that, not on purpose, right? I just came to mind some girl who was running in the ball, what do you call it? We went to recess, we were playing out there and she was running and I was pretending she was creating a earthquake. I don't know why I did that, but that was like, now I think back on that, like, that wasn't very nice. I don't know why I did that. So,
But that was the norm then. I mean, I was the same and bullied in kind of sixth, seventh, eighth grade, and more name calling and on my
sixth
appearance. And
sixth
that's
grade,
a very tough time for kids in middle school as well. So one day there will be a middle school version of these books. These are more elementary, but that's the group that we really need to tackle. But I think that now when I think back, even just teasing, and when you're then and you're thinking you're joking and kind of being funny, but there
right.
might be these hurtful undertones that now have become really eye-opening to me.
Yeah, I don't know yeah, I think you're right. I think I was just trying to be funny and make a joke in recess. And at the time it was not looking back on that, but I'm just glad I had some good friends being surrounded by different people. I don't know if, what the right thing is to do for bullies. I think we need more counselors probably at the schools. I don't know my sister teaches seventh grade, by the way. She's got a brutal, but she's really good with kids. I joke that she's an actress. They do have to put on a facade sometimes, but it, she found her calling. She always wanted to help younger kids where I'll help coach them, but that's different than teaching them, right? It's a
Oh,
different.
absolutely. Absolutely. It takes a lot of patience, I think, there. And your point about the bully piece of it is my heart always breaks for the bully. I have some sort of deep empathy because I remember telling my oldest this at a very young age when he was upset about something. And I said, you have no idea what's going on at home with a
Correct.
child. You have no idea if that child is being abused or if that child is verbally or whatever it might be, or maybe someone in their family died, or maybe, they're just having a hard time, or maybe they have some neurodiversity themselves and they're just trying to figure out how to navigate all of these uncomfortable feelings in their body. And so because of that, they're overcompensating and, being mean to you. And so a lot of times you don't know what's happening on the inside with them. And it's important to just lead with kindness.
And I don't think I ever responded poorly to these people, but they did kind of, maybe probably why I got into sports. Maybe that was my way of venting. They would make fun of the way my mom would say is Brigitte, and so they called me Appreciate and that kind of stuff. So, and I'm just like, so that's why I got a little, should say, anal retentive about this is how you spell my name, this is how you say it, because of that environment. And I think they were trying to be funny, making fun of my mom's accent, but she was saying it the proper way. At least people are polite and ask me, how should I say your name now? Just because they know it's not spelled the normal way, the Irish way or whatever. But I think this is so cool. And then I guess my last question is, you have you created eco parenting. Okay. You said it's philosophy built on the children's challenges, reflect back on us, right? On what needs attention.
Yes. And that, for me, I've learned so much more about myself and my own just mental health through my child. And learning more about him, I had so many eye-opening moments and realizing that we're going through all of this together. And even just telling him about his ADHD diagnosis, when I felt like that was the time to say, hey, buddy, I wanted to let you know, and then this is what this means. It's not necessarily a bad thing. There are some beautiful things that come out of the ADHD brain. Your brain typically works faster than most people's, which might tend for you to interrupt, but it also means that you might be 2 steps ahead. You're very strategic. So he plays chess. He taught me how to play chess. But through this journey, I'm able to say to him, I understand you and I feel that way. I feel overwhelmed when I go into a crowd of people, or I feel this tightness in my chest when I get upset about something. I'm able to articulate that to him in a way that he can see that he just doesn't feel like he's the only one that this is experiencing this emotion, and that there are other people out there. I mean, I mentioned loves basketball. Michael Jordan has ADHD. So that is something to say, like, well, your idol, you're his biggest fan. Everything you wear is Jordan. And he also has this. So it's not a curse in that way, but having those open conversations with him and trying to help him navigate that, but at the same time realizing that he triggers me. And I think that's the hardest part of being neurodiverse myself, and having a neurodiverse child means that I'm going to recognize some of these triggers, or maybe even things that I did and respond in a way my parents responded. And so I might get really frustrated and flustered because I'm realizing I'm overwhelmed in my own body. I've never had an issue in my entire life with sounds. I love concerts. I love live music. And since I've had children, and especially in the last few years, I've noticed how much sound really bothers me, and this is a newer thing to me. And so I'll notice that if I'm with them and we are in a crowded place, I'm a lot more, my cup has not been full all day and replenished with mindfulness and grounding techniques. And so it's spilling over by the end of the day, or maybe I've been on conference calls all day for work and have a lot going on, or maybe I have a deadline of some sort. And so my patience and tolerance isn't there. And so I need to recognize through this echo parenting that I'm the one that has to create the calm so that he can mirror and mimic me. But he is really my greatest teacher throughout all of this.
I love that. Yeah, it comes back to we learn so much from our kids. You just got to reflect on that and how we are. They want to follow us too, follow our path, act like us, act like our, the parents and their friends. And I like how you mentioned in the email I got from you originally, that you're in the messy middle of your life right now. I like that. Life is messy. Life is not perfect. And that's something that I think holds everybody back. Thinking everything has to be perfect, and it's not. And I like to embrace the messy, right?
Yes. And somehow I think I was tested by having boys, because
Yes.
historically I've always been very neat and clean and a little almost OCD tendencies in that realm. Probably some of my anxiety that comes in, and things being neat in kind of perfection mode. And now I have 2 boys that are just tornadoes,
Yes.
and something's clean, and 5 minutes later there's toys everywhere. And a lot of me just has to let it go and kind of succumb to the what's happening and the nature of it. And just, I'll use Mel Robbins in that sense and say, let them, and just kind of let them do their thing and try not to let it bother me, and realize there's other things that I should be focused on than, a clean house.
Yeah, I like that. It's definitely having boys is a challenge, but it's a good challenge. And then we learn more, you said the eco parenting, we learn so much about ourselves, about them. And my house used to be cleaner, but I've gotten more, well, my sons are adults now, but I was just always like, oh, so dirty. I'm like, why are you so worried? I think it's just in general, the culture that we have too, that your house, has to be look a certain way, but you have to look perfect. You have to dress perfect, right? And that's what everything that I would write, I did a lot of writing. I got over that, and that doesn't have to be perfect, right? And I think that's what stops people from writing books. And you did that. They're so worried it's not perfect, but it's okay.
Oh, there's a whole one on perfectionism, actually.
But that's kind of what I was saying. That's one of my things that I always would overthink when I was younger about being, is this perfect? Is, you just, and a lot of people want to write, but they don't put it out there. And I think being curious is an important thing, being around kids. I think, are ADHD kids more curious, maybe?
100%. And the questions that come from them, and both of mine are very deep thinkers from a young age, 2 years old, saying, how does God see? Or how are rocks made? Just questions that you're like, what? I mean, my little one, he asked me, I had a necklace that had a third eye on it. And he said, Mom, what's the third eye for? And I said, your intuition, your balance. He said, set your heart free, Mom. This is a 2-year-old talking. So the constant questions. And I always tell them I love their questions, but there are days where they don't stop asking questions. And I'm trying to not lose it, because we just got in the car and I'm like, can we get settled into the car? I haven't even turned it on. I don't have the directions. And then you're asking me 100 questions, but I love their curiosity. I can't fault them for that at all. It's gonna make them great people in the long run. But sometimes it does feel like I'm constantly playing that 1,000 question game.
They don't know any better, right? But
Yes.
you're being kids, and I just why I think that age group of your sons, I think that's my favorite age group. The what is it, kindergarten to like fourth grade, but middle school is when they get more challenging. But you'll experience that in a couple of years.
Because they say it's different types of things. The
Yeah.
stress, it's not any easier per se. It's a different type of thing that now they're learning about their bodies and asking, which my son has already started asking all those questions and trying to figure out on the fly, how do you explain this in the way that's appropriate for his age? It's going to be a different conversation in 3 years, but
Yeah.
I'm glad they're asking me, though. I've told them that I want them to ask me versus other people, or if they hear a term at school and they don't know what it is, come ask me what it is. I'd rather you not have misinformation, and I'd rather at least give you that, whatever the scientific definition of that is.
I like that. I love how you're raising your boys, and you have a great perspective on life. I like talking to people like you, and you have, your lens of purpose and resilience, what you've gone through, and you're sharing that story, and you're going to help children with all these books. I think that's so awesome. So where can people learn more about you, Sara?
There are 2 places. Instagram, it's at Sara Lewis Hartley, SARA, and then saralewishartley.com. You can also go to my website to download a free guide to the Aligned Parenting Method. It's a 5-step grounding technique that really allows for you to become grounded in some of the most difficult moments where you're trying to remain calm, which I know can be hard for all of us. I'm doing it because I'm at fault for it. Try to not yell. I try to not lose it, but it happens. And so I needed something that was going to help. So if you head to my website, you can download your free guide, and it comes with an example scenario of how I used it. And you can actually see how you would put that into play.
I love that. And for those that are listening, I'll include the links that she just mentioned in the description. And I really appreciate what you're doing for the younger generation. It's just actually helping everybody, not just them. Thank you so much, Sara.
Thank you, Brigitte.